Over the last week or so, the Dallas Mavericks have been the hottest team in the Western Conference. After a disappointing start last season to the Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic era, they're on a 6-game winning streak headed into All-Star break. And that duo of Kyrie and Luka has been absolutely lethal. They look like the best 1-2 punch in all of basketball right now. We've got Luka averaging 34 points per game and nearly 10 assists per game on 50% shooting from the floor. And then there's also Kyrie averaging 25.5 points, also shooting at 50% from the floor. And the first thing you're looking at is, man, these guys are scoring at a very, very high volume. They're averaging a lot of points together combined, but the most impressive thing to me is how efficiently they're doing it. And it's so funny considering how much premature hate that this duo was getting when Dallas made that trade. A lot of people seem to write him off. And that's what happens a lot whenever we get like these superstar pairings, right? People assume that they're not going to fit together because of chemistry issues or they're not going to want to share the ball with each other. Look at the Clippers. Same thing happened with them. When they picked up James Harden, there was this assumption that they weren't going to want to play with each other. They weren't going to be able to coexist because all of those guys were, over the course of their careers, kind of score first players. But one thing we have to realize is some of these superstars have a really good ability to adapt to one another when they're on the court. And that's something that's very underrated about both Kyrie Irving and Luka. Their interchangeability, their versatility makes them a really, really good fit next to one another. And that's really especially with Kyrie. Kyrie's ability to kind of play both on and off the ball is very, very underrated. He did it a lot in Brooklyn, right? Where he was playing that point guard sort of role. But when James Harden came in, he kind of shifted over to the two, did a lot more of his actions off the ball, and he thrived in that sort of situation. And he's doing it a lot here in Dallas as well. And as we're seeing, according to the record, according to their numbers together, they are coexisting very well with one another. And you have to give some credit to the front office also for making some pretty solid additions to the roster at the trade deadline. I'm going to start here with the addition of Daniel Gafford. So far, since being here in Dallas, he's fit just perfectly. In 3 games, he's got 2 double-doubles. And a very interesting fact is since adding him and since having him out there on the court after the trade, they have been the top rebounding team in the NBA after being bottom half in the league in that category. And he is like the quintessential fit around Luka Doncic, a really athletic big man who can protect the paint, who can play in pick and roll situations. Those are the types of players they love to put around Luka. And over the last couple of years, it's been more and more of an emphasis for Dallas to have more guys who can be a presence in the paint. That's the biggest reason why they went and drafted Derek Lively. And this gives Jason Kidd the option to stagger between those two guys. And last night against the Spurs, we got an example of just how good they are when they're both healthy together. We saw them give up only 46 points in the paint to the Spurs. Their season average is 53 points in the paint, which is around 22nd in the league in that category. And that's a small sample size. It's just 1 game, but that could be a sign of really, really good things to come for this Dallas defense. And then there was the addition of PJ Washington from Charlotte, a really athletic stretch 4 type of player. And it does look like he's still kind of figuring things out here in Dallas. He hasn't been used heavily in that offense and he hasn't looked super, super impressive yet. But the hope is that he adds a little bit more versatility to their offensive attack. This team can be pretty one-dimensional at times. And that leads me to my first critique about this team. While they have been playing great, one big question is, that duo of Kyrie and Luka is playing absolutely well, but is there enough variation in this offense for them to get deep in the playoffs? Right now, as things stand, they are number 2 in isolation frequency. So do they have a team offense that's sufficient enough to win a title? Can this 1v1 heavy offense that can get pretty stagnant at times around Kyrie and Luka, can this get them past groups like Denver, the teams in LA, and others in the Western Conference come playoff time? So that is a major question to ask. While that duo of Kyrie and Luka is just great, is this team's offense going to be enough for them to make a deep run, given how stagnant they can be? And it'll be less of an issue if this team was really, really good from a defensive standpoint. So, for example, right now, the Clippers are number 1 in isolation frequency, but you rely on them a little bit more come playoff time because they can also get it done from a defensive standpoint. And generally, that's just not the case right now with this Dallas Mavericks team. They just don't have a strong enough defensive front to make up for their lack of offensive variation. So your question is, come playoff time in these big games, if you're having droughts on offense due to stagnation, can their defense pick it up for them? I don't think so. It'll be very, very tough to do so. Right now, they're strongest defensively on the interior, but on the perimeter, not so much. And in a guard-heavy league that's very perimeter scoring-based, having guys at the point of attack is going to be very, very important. And right now, they just don't have that in abundance. And while they do have Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, and those two guys together can't help them from a points in the paint standpoint on the defensive end, they don't have enough guys out there on the perimeter who can get consistent enough stops. Let's look at Milwaukee, for example. They went and gave up Drew Holiday in that big trade to bring back Damian Lillard, and their idea was we still have Giannis and Brook Lopez, and given that, those two guys who are rim protectors primarily, that should be able to hold us down from a defensive standpoint. But the reality is they don't have enough perimeter defense. They don't have enough guys who can guard at the point of attack, and they're getting consistently punished by scoring guards for that. So that is something to keep an eye on. Right now, I'm not worried about their paint defense, but if you cannot guard out there on the perimeter, if you can't guard the point of attack, you're going to have a lot of issues in the playoffs, especially when you're dealing with guys like Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. You're dealing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. So much offensive talent out there on the perimeter, and right now they just don't have guys who can match up there there defensively. So I like Dallas a lot, and I think this is great for them right now, and I love what they did at the trade deadline. But right now, I wonder just how high their ceiling is on both ends of the floor. Is their current offensive system a championship-winning offensive system? And also, can their defense elevate in a conference where you're dealing with so many guys who are dominant out there on the perimeter? So I love that Kyrie and Luka are playing so well with each other, and I love the way Daniel Gafford is playing, and I love the additions that they made to the roster. And there have been some great things they've gotten from other role players, but still, their two-way play is in question. How translatable is the stuff that we're seeing now going to become playoff time? So I love how hot they've been over the last couple of games here, and I love that this Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic duo is looking like it's working perfectly. But those are the sorts of things that we need to see answered for the Mavericks if we actually want to consider them as true title contenders in the Western Conference.